Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 101. Thank you for joining us. As we enter the second century of the Kolbecast, Bonnie, Jordan, and I take some time to reflect on the development of the podcast over the first 100 episodes and to look forward to the future. In typical Kolbecast fashion, our conversation takes us down many different paths. We hope that you'll enjoy the journey as much as we have.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Colby homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Colby Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Colby online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
Well, Jordan and Stephen, I'm thinking back to when the year 1999 was giving way to Y2K. So much was made of that new century, the new millennium, not starting until 2001. I don't know if that was true where you were. I'd heard a lot about that in my circles. How do I translate that to this episode 101? Last week we aired episode 100 with Mrs. Diane Muth, one of the founding mothers of Colby Academy. As we embark upon the next 100 episodes, let's take a look back at the school year we are finishing and the conversations we've had along the way. Where shall we start?
I think it's interesting that wondering about when the century rolls over, or whatever. They're having that problem with the online academy also because they're hitting their 10th year, if you can believe that.
Wow.
And some of them are wanting to celebrate early. Others are saying you have to wait till that next year to really finish off the 10th year. But in terms of the podcast, I'm just amazed that it's been this many episodes. I really can't believe that 100 episodes. Congratulations.
Yes.
To you all as well. Thank you both for being a part of that, for getting us here to this 100 episodes, 101st episode. Thank you for everything. It's been quite the ride and so much fun still.
It has been fun, and I'm wondering, Bonnie, since you've been on every single episode, maybe only the Colby Man Show was the one that you did. I think you were still there behind the scenes, but what has stood out to you this year?
Oh goodness, when you ask me these questions, the things I think of so many things later that stick out. But I guess that's the most authentic, right? That whatever sticks out at the time. Yeah, I have been a part of almost every single recording. There are probably a handful that I haven't been on, but have been in the back behind the scenes on most of them. So, actually in episode 100, we added on at the end a little clip from one of our very first recordings that Hope and I did. So it was fun in a way, sort of, to go back and listen, humbling as well, to go back and listening to those early recordings. And I liken it to a particular Food Network TV personality whose show I used to like to watch when she first started compared to where she is now. It's quite the difference. Not that I'm anywhere anything like her, but it was like that for me to go back and hear those early recordings. So what has jumped out to me, I think overarching theme would be the generosity of you all and of our guests who come and talk to us, and they share so much of themselves, of what they've experienced and of their knowledge. And this is not a quick process, and they spend a lot of time with us before in preparation and afterward following up with resources they send to us, and the time they take recording with us, and they're very patient. I in particular am given to a lot of wheel spinning, as I call it, and I go in fits and starts that don't end up in the final version, but everyone is so patient with me doing well. I'm kind of working my way through that, and the blessings that have come from all these conversations I've been able to have. In so many instances, there are questions I've had, concerns I've had, and I'm so grateful to be able to ask people who can answer those, and have God working through all this array of folk who have lived so much and experienced so much and worked so hard to glorify Him in the gifts that He's given them.
Well, I know we know, but maybe the listeners don't know that a lot of the people that come on the show express afterwards how grateful they were because it was a fun experience. And I can speak for my wife, she was so nervous the first time that she came on, but afterwards she was just like, that was so much fun. And I attribute that to the way that you're able to make people feel at ease. And so if anyone out there is listening, it's not scary, even if you don't like public speaking or whatever. I think it's just fun. You're never going to find more gentle hosts than Stephen and Bonnie, and then all the work that goes in behind the scenes as far as editing. And I think that's something as an overall thing that has really stood out to me is how much people enjoy. They think it was a fun experience. They're open to do it again after they've done it once. And we added Stephen this year, so that's another big highlight.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's been a lot of fun. And so I don't listen to the podcast as often while I'm mowing lawn now, because it happens before they actually drop. So I've already had a chance to listen to them. But yeah, it certainly has started out last year mowing all my grass here in Arkansas, and I just have listening to Bonnie and the guests and Jordan occasionally coming in. That was a lot of fun. But I'm glad it's been fun to jump in, and it's a little interesting for me because I tend to just like to talk about what I like, what I'm interested in for the most part. So it's been kind of fun to try to figure out what I should be doing in a podcast. But over time, it just it worked out where it's like, oh, I should be the voice of a Colby parent, which I am, to be asking the questions that I'd want to know from some of these great guests, and if I had a chance to ask them, and I do. So I'm lucky to be able to jump in there.
Well, you certainly have added a tremendous amount to our conversations, and you've really picked up on ways to step in and add to the conversation and bring the perspective that you have as a dad, homeschooling dad, your business background, your life experience, your own classical formation, and your path toward holiness. All of that come together to really add so much to the conversations, and I'm really, really grateful that you stepped in to be a part of them. So that's been another highlight. Yeah. And it means so much to me that people feel comfortable talking to us, that it turns out to be a positive experience for them. I can certainly relate to the nerves, and so I'm really gratified that they overall had positive experiences coming to be guests and are willing to come back.
Yeah. I wonder. I guess something I'd be curious to see is, have you ever been just really sort of caught off guard or blown away by one of the guests, something they've said you weren't expecting at all? Is there anything like that has happened that you can remember and that made it into an episode?
There are plenty of times when we have an outline of what we're going to talk about, and the conversation does not go according to that. When they say things that we want to hear more about, or they continue to expound upon that we could not have foreseen, or that Stephen will raise that I didn't think of that. I think there have been plenty of times when that has happened, that it turned out all the better than I could have planned, and that's the working of the Holy Spirit there. There are a lot of times that I think that I have been trying to plan what I'm going to say in response, and this is very much along the lines of listening to people, just conversations in everyday life, right? Like, you need to listen to what they're saying right now rather than be formulating your response to what you think they might say. So this is lots of practice at that. I don't know. What about for you, Stephen? Have there been any instances of that where something surprised you that came up in the conversation?
I think some of the emotionally moving things are what's really interesting to me. And what stands out is our conversation about gifted students, which just was a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And just almost being moved to tears with that kind of that Joseph had about those gifts not defining the student. That wasn't their identity. It just, it's something, yes, I'm aware of, but the way he said it, and it was just such an insightful but also moving thing to think, yes, that is a real danger with whatever gift you have. You think your value isn't actually producing something rather than just being a child of God and doing whatever you can to develop that love. So then when things go wrong, you're crushed, if that's where your value lies. And he just said it so beautifully. So that was kind of moving, I guess. But the conversation we had with the Lunds was just, I mean, the excitement that they had for the program was just, I, there's a moment where she says, "I love Colby," and
Yes.
I just kind of want to get that little bit and keep that on my desktop so I can just play that over and over again.
Yes.
I love Colby. I love Colby.
Yes.
Those are two that jump to mind, at least. But
what about you, Jordan? Were you surprised? Have you had those moments?
Oh, I was surprised when Dr. Prudlow disagreed with me on one of the episodes. Actually, no, I wasn't. That stemmed from I think that was one of the Colby Man shows, and that goes back a ways between the two of us. But it's really cool because I've always wanted to talk to him more and spend a little more time talking with him. I met him briefly at a graduation for Monica, his daughter, several years ago, but we didn't get a chance to really talk. But I could tell immediately that we had a lot in common. I'd like to talk to him more. So the times that we've actually talked have been recorded.
Yeah.
So we'd have to do it behind the scenes sometime. But he's
Yes.
anyway, I've been surprised by some of these guests that we bring on, and you just kind of hit it off with them, and might be the only time that you've talked to them. But it's all recorded, and then the listener gets to tune in and see how it goes. So that's a fun part of podcasting, is meeting new people and recording your conversation with them.
I've been enjoying my children enjoying the podcasts, and it's just kind of fun. Like, my daughter downloads them every week and listens in, and my son, I think, is probably not as regular any longer, but still will catch an episode every once in a while, and it's fun to kind of that they enjoy, what we're talking about here, and they, even though that's not normally the target audience that I'm thinking about as far as a freshman at college and a sophomore in high school, but they still find value in hearing what people have to say, the different topics. So that's been a lot of fun.
I love that. My sister Hope would talk often about how she appreciated the sense of being a part of the larger conversation, of being at the adults table, so to speak. So I love that they listen whenever they do. Similar at my house, like we're hit or miss with kids listening to episodes here. So I think the wide appeal that we cover a lot of topics, and it's fun when we have Colby students on that they have interacted with or they may know of from their interactions throughout the year or the different events that happen. I think that's neat, though, that you have your focus group at your house.
And you could never imagine, like, if this were the local public school or something like that, and some of the parents had a little podcast talking about the school, it would be, the kids, it would be an embarrassment to most kids, but it is the sitting at the adults table, that kind of thing, that I love that about homeschool kids in general. As I was coaching basketball this past year, 5th grade girls, there was one girl who from the very beginning really stood out to me in the way that she listened, the way that she would come up and talk with me as like I would tying my shoes or whatever. And she'd come over and say, I got to go to my grandma's house and she has a pool, and just talking about things like that. Whereas the other ones that go to the local school there, they would sort of congregate together and had this idea of, we don't talk to adult. You're basically the teacher, and we don't talk to the teacher like that. And then I found out that she was homeschooled, and I was like, I knew it. I just knew it. She had that about her. So I love that there's homeschooled high school and college kids that are tuning into the podcast, wanting to hear what the adults are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just waiting for them to become critical. That's the next step, is when they start saying, "Hey, Dad, you didn't really bring it on that intro today, so you need to up your game." I'm waiting for that. That's the next step, right? Yeah.
No, you guys and your intros, I enjoy those so much. That's like something I look forward to every week, is hearing what intro I'm going to get to add to the mix. I look forward to it every week.
That's, as you were talking about, just kind of developing and how you're doing the podcast, and you get used to it. You kind of fit into a rhythm. I'm grateful that at least something's changing. When I first was asked could I do an intro, I think I spent like a couple of hours carefully, just for this little thing. Eventually you think, really, was that worth the amount of time? But now it's kind of like just repeat it until it actually sounds somewhat intelligible, and and then just go with it. But it's just interesting how it shouldn't have taken that long, but over time you just get used to it's not recreating. I don't have to try to come up with Shakespeare for every podcast or whatever.
And the upgrades, like with technology and all of that, so you've grown like in your abilities, and you do kind of get used to things and hit a rhythm and get better at it, just like anything else. But then there have been, I don't know if the listeners can tell, but there have been, we've found our way, and Bonnie has made her way doing research. What's the best way to capture these conversations? What's the cleanest way, the clearest way? And so there have been tech upgrades behind the scenes and stuff, even as recently as this year. And I expect that we'll keep going. I don't know what we can do. we can always get better, I guess. But
I always like those behind the scenes podcast episodes. I'm a behind the scenes, like outtakes and the making of films and TV shows and things like that, or whatever. So any of the behind the scenes stuff, I'm all about it. So yeah, we've improved along the way, and that's going back to what you were saying, Stephen. That's very similar experience for me. I've some of the editing earlier I was having a flashback as I was editing earlier this week to around the 1 year mark of the podcast, and I was editing an episode then, and it was in like a million pieces, and it was taking me, I was going on lots of hours on that one, and I was happy to do it. I really wanted it to be just right, as I'm sure you're not surprised to hear. I'm kind of particular about how I want it to sound, but yeah, we've tried to improve our process and the way that we record our conversations to make it, going back to that comfort level people have talking to us. We just use Zoom to record. We've tried a couple other things, but we landed on Zoom, and we're able to record everybody on their own line of audio for anyone who wants to nerd out with me on audio things for a second, so that we can adjust things that need to be, but also kind of keep it real, give it legitimacy. It's not the super high end, but it gets the job done, and we're able to make it sound pretty good, hopefully. It does matter to me. The audio quality matters a lot to me. I want it to sound as good as it can, so that people understand what's being said.
And what a challenge. There is that extra challenge of everybody having their own equipment and their own setup, and you're just to bring everybody. So, we've like the inline microphone on earbuds. It's like when they crackle because they're rubbing up against something. Mm-hmm. There's nothing you can do to edit that out because it's voice and crackle. And so, yes. But the guests don't want, so we have to talk about, okay, you're going to have to kind of hold that out or be careful, about those things. Well, you do that, Bonnie, which is nice because I don't have to do that. But nobody wants to end up on the show and have people cringing in pain whenever they start talking. So it's always nice to make sure everything's done well.
Sure. There have been just a couple of times when I think guests have felt like, oh, I didn't sound, I thought I had a different mic setup or something I sound like I'm in a rain barrel or something, I didn't sound like I thought I did. And that's hard. It's hard for them, and it's hard for me. I'm like, oh, I wish I could change that. Our best shot is while we're getting it recorded in the first place, but sometimes it's hard to tell. We're not using super fancy editing software or anything like that. I don't want to give that impression that I'm like in my DJ studio or anything like that. It's very simple tools, but
these tools are really good now. The quality is think about 20 years ago, we couldn't have done this, and now people are so used to Zoom meetings and things, like it's very easy to get them to come on. They already know what to do. But the listeners should be aware that the last episode with Mrs. Muth, we didn't do that in our normal way. That was basically Stephen and I hijacking her from her office in Napa, as she had just come back from teaching all morning. And then in the Colby offices at noon, everyone goes and prays the Angelus down in front of the crucifix that's on the ground floor of Colby. And so they're always wanting visitors. So if you ever want to make a little pilgrimage to the headquarters, you should go check it out. But and go pray the Angelus with them, and I'm sure they'll feed you also. They love doing it. But we just grabbed her and said, can we record this with you? And so we just did it on the computer, just opened up our little thing, and it was on Steven's computer. Mine was not working for some reason. Luckily, we had a backup. So we have done some things on the fly like that when we can't do it in our normal way. And then Bonnie works her magic. So
Magic, yes.
tries to make it into something listenable. And so anyway, I was just bringing that up because there are times when we can't just do it the normal way, or the guest has some issue that was happening that affects the audio. But other than that, I mean, it's always very consistent, and it's been getting consistently better this whole time.
Well, let's just have a laugh about that. How an in-person conversation like that is the anomaly, right? We're used to doing all these remote meetings and recording in this setup. So if we have the golden opportunity to have an in-person conversation with Mrs. Muth, and it sounds great. I think you guys did a great job getting the sound for that. The distinction between that recording and most of our Zoom recordings is not significant. I think it sounds really good. You guys did a good job.
Yeah, it was a little wild too, because we just were in a little room. I don't even know what that room is used for now, but when I started there in 2013, that was Mr. Everett Buyarski's office was in that room. Now it looks totally different, but I was just thinking I could have never thought that 9 years later I'd be in there with Stephen Hayden and Mrs. Muth, and it's a totally different room, and we're recording for a podcast and all of that. It's amazing. It's amazing to me.
Sure is. Yeah. Have there been particular episodes or parts of episodes, conversations or topics that have come up this year or in the course of the podcast that stand out, that you have more to say on that, or thoughts you want to throw into the mix?
Yeah, I always just end up being really passionate about anything homeschooling wise, and so just so many good conversations that actually, whether it's with Colby advisors in interviews with potential advisors and things, or on the podcast, I get confused where I've said things. And this is, I think, typical of me, but maybe it's of all men as they're getting older, that you just keep telling the same stories and saying the same things over and over again. When we were first married, we just started, like, my wife would like number the various rants that I would go on and be like, okay, yeah, you said that yesterday. This is rant number 11. So now you can just say rant 11 whenever you want to start that, and we'll just save a bunch of time in the conversation. But yeah. So I just love, talking with the parents and things about homeschooling and how wonderful that is for students. And I tend to always think about things in like, why does it have to be done the way that it always was? When I look at a problem or look at something and think, saying to me, well, that's the way we've always done it, is about the fastest way to get me to come up with really radically different solutions, because that just doesn't work for me. So when we start talking about schooling, and I just keep thinking, this doesn't make sense at all any longer in today's world, where sending all of your kids the same age into a building with, and we've talked about this multiple times on the podcast, but it's just one of those things that it's just so clear in my mind, and yet the world just keeps going on and on, and it's like, if you could just see how wonderful it is to kind of take full control, to embrace that that vocation that you have when you're married, to be the primary educators, and then to, if you're able, and not everybody's able to do this, but if you're able to participate in that fullest way, where you've got your family there and you're interacting as a family, is just fantastic. And we often talk about how hard it is, and I know there's conflict, but the wonderfulness about it is just so much greater. And it might be easier in my family or with my wife and I guess, than it is for some people, because I went through public school. I knew I didn't want that for my kids. I met my wife. She loved homeschooling. And, even as we were developing our friendship and our relationship, I knew this is the woman I want teaching my children. So before marriage, I was like, no, we're fully embracing this. And I'm not going to marry somebody who I don't think is the best teacher for my children. that would be kind of strange, so I guess I just have this experience where it just seems so obvious, and yet I know it's not. It's not obvious to the world. So anyway.
Yeah. The different paths how we all end up where we are here now, those are so fascinating to hear. Some like you have known from the get-go that this is how we're going to go. Some of us, like me, we did not intend to do it this way, and yet here we are, and it's this is how it needs to be.
And I don't mean to say all of that again, that other options aren't good, because just like some of our parents have said, no matter, and my wife has always talked about a homeschooling parent being a general contractor. So I think I've mentioned that multiple times, but so you are in control and you should be overseeing everything, but that might mean that your child is in the local public school, but you're just, because that's the option, the best option that you have discerned for your child. But that doesn't mean you get a pass then that you've checked out. Then the parent who's doing that, it needs to be overseeing, engaging, keeping that relationship going. And I think it's just so much harder to do that than to be more in control. You decide what you're going to do, rather than fighting with other people about what your child is going to be allowed to do. But anyway.
Well, certainly we have more time this way compared to when everybody was in school. We had far less time in the day, so there is more. So there's both the challenging and the good, and the challenging can be good, but there's the challenging and also the easier, happier, lighter moments, the kind of ebbs and flows of the day. We get more of that being home together throughout the day. We get more of when each of us is at our best, rather than when we have given that elsewhere and are depleted from that, and not able to give as much of that to each other in the household from doing the various other things. So it's kind of a more complete experience for each of us to know each other and help each other. So yeah, that was something I noticed almost that first year, is how the time that we had together allowed us to experience more high points during the day, not just everyone's tired from school.
Yeah, there's such a freedom, I think, in that people could take advantage of, but often they don't, or they think that they can't. And one of the things that I've really felt this year, I guess, even as busy and at times like busy and complaining as I was about things, but I really got a sense of gratitude this year that God has put me in a role where my thing every day is to help families and to help students every day, all day. That's what it is. So we're the ones who get the opportunity to focus on this exclusively and look for answers and look for better ways of doing things and to communicate that message. And yeah, I'm with you, Stephen. I like to look for things, sort of question, like, why is it done this way? And then to try to communicate that, because it takes a lot of convincing sometimes on this. And one of the things that has come up in several episodes, and it's a question that I'm really fascinated by, and I think it's because of my background in New Testament studies. But then I've been teaching Latin and classics for so long, and I really see this disconnect between the world before Christ, which are the classical literature, a lot of it that we read, and the world after Christ. And so I'm looking at like these ideas in approaching history, and I feel like how that's affected me in my role at Colby a lot is now as a teacher, I'm bringing in much more conscious of the literature that we read. What kind is it? What is its form? Where did it come from? So it's not just like all Latin is Latin. Yes, it is the same language, but it came from very different people, depending on which era, which century of Latin you're reading, and that reminds me that the curriculum as a whole, the way that people are teaching it and the way things are structured, I think it's a huge advantage to give young people and their parents this scope of history that actually makes sense. and then you can really understand what your role is in that. And we're going to be here for a short time, but what is our time? What is it really? How are we spending our time, and how can we participate in this journey of history? And especially if you don't understand it at all. So it's this sort of integration of this view of history in the way that I'm trying to teach the text, that I think a lot of people are doing that at Colby, but from the structure from the top, it's made for that. It's a Catholic curriculum that is displaying that singular truth. And again, I'm just really grateful more than anything. And I guess I can say that because classes are all the way over now and stuff. So I don't know if I'd have been saying it a few months ago, but I do feel it deeply.
I think that's such a critical thing, that people do have that historical perspective. And I mean, it's something we see constantly, that it's partially, I think, because things change so rapidly these days as far as technology and such. So there's this very quick, things are moving, but it's really hard. I think it's hard for me to understand that things weren't always like they are right now. With my engineering background, I tend to like to delve that way in technology as well. Like, how did cities get water in medieval times? I'll suddenly start wondering, or what does it take to make iron? And you start going through that process and you think, oh, we've always had iron or steel or whatever. It's like, no, this is a huge process with all of these different, and you think, how did we ever get to the point where we are today? It sounds just so overwhelming with those things. But I think not, particularly reading the original authors and a lot of the history, which I love, that happens in the Colby High School history program. That is such a good thing to get those different perspectives of Roman authors or Greek authors as well, just because it's not refined at all. It's not somebody saying, oh, here's what happened, and they just filter out all of this stuff. You get to hear about what was going on from those times and just before it. So really important, really important.
Yeah, Edward Gibbon, who wrote the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, said I forget where it is. I don't even know if it was in that work, but he said those who don't read are no better than those who can't read, or something like that. And I thought, and I think we should look at this as an opportunity. We should really look at it as an opportunity to engage in this education, which is it's a lifelong education, and really it's a self-education in the end. It's just giving you the opportunity to do it. But I mean, you can sit in a class and not read the book and still pass the test or whatever, but you haven't done anything as far as self-educating I think you're right, Stephen, with the idea of like these, looking around us and seeing how we got here. The challenge, the scary thing, I think, for our situation is that so much is based on Christian principles, which we don't realize. Like all the arguments are about rights. Whose rights are they? But putting it even in that category of rights is putting it in a Christian category, something that wasn't there before. So I could go into more details about that, but I think it's enough to say that that one of the things I think we have to do for the future is articulate very clearly how the West it was preserved and we were given the treasures of antiquity and the modern world through that it's a Christian thing. It wouldn't have happened innately, just like finding iron and all of that took people discovering those things. But it's sort of the same. We are given a huge gift to live when we do, and it's our job to secure that, I think, for the future. And it's so the new battle I don't think is against paganism, like some people do. We don't look at people as barbarians anymore. We don't look at anyone as a barbarian in a global society. But what we do have to do is kind of we have to stand up for ourselves, for our children, and for our ancestors, and say that this is right because it's from God. It's not, you didn't discover it yourself, which is I think people have assimilated so much. In Germany, they would always say something like, they'd be like, in German, we have a saying, cast not your pearls before the swine. And I'm like, I don't think that's a German saying. I mean, you're saying it in German, but that's like an analogy to the whole modern society. They're like, we have this without recognizing where it came from.
And so that lack of logic or lack of reasoning, then you get, so you kind of, you've got these principles, but then they try to cut the base out from underneath. So you get that kind of, I won't pronounce this correctly, but the Baron von Munchausen, he pulls himself up by the ponytail or whatever, that that idea. So you just basically have this thing without a foundation then, and it doesn't make any sense then. So yeah, you can see the logical sort of fallacies in it, but you have to get the other people, or you have to have people realize that that's because you're based on these Christian principles down here, and now you're trying to throw them out, that sort of thing. It's really good.
I like it when you get into the details, you guys.
Yeah, I guess in general, I think there's a lot of pessimism, I think, for the future because of the recent things that have happened. There's always war. There's always these things going on. The future is getting, in some ways it's getting worse, in some ways it's getting better. I mean, if you, the outlook of the future, and we always focus on one side or the other, but I think we have to take them hand in hand. And one of the things that I'm always really encouraged, and I don't think she said it on the recording, but Mrs. Muth is very optimistic, and she always says it in a way, I think she did say it on the recording. She always says she's optimistic because we are pro-life, and Colby families and others like us, they tend to have a lot of children, and they're thinking about the future. And she thinks that will play out big time someday, and I do too. I think she's right. I think that doing this we will keep being fruitful and multiplying in very many ways. I noticed, and I've said off air, kind of, as just an update of my situation here where I live, but we are preparing our backyard, and we had to cut down a bunch of trees because we have these ideas and these plans to make the yard even more fun for children and to make it beautiful and to have a garden. Quite a few of our neighbors are not happy about that because it takes away a view from them. I don't know exactly the reason, but I was telling my wife, I think part of it is in the same way that if you have a big family and you're walking, even if you're dressed nicely and have it look like you have it all together, and you walk into a grocery store and you get those looks of people like, why so many kids? And I think that a lot of people don't have a sense of the future. And there was a professor that told my wife when she was an undergrad, if you don't have kids, you don't have a sense of the future. And I totally disagreed with it then. Completely. I thought that was ridiculous. I'm like, what does that even mean? Then I go and live in Germany with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel for all those years, who makes decisions without any skin in the game at all because she had no children. And I really attribute it to that very basic thing. And I would tell the listeners, do not vote leaders in that don't have kids, because they're not thinking in this long-term way. So I think our neighbors, it boils down to, are mad because they want it to stay the way it is right now. They're not looking towards the future. And if you're looking towards the future and you're making plans like this and having a big family and doing the things that we're trying to do here at Colby, you may not have a lot of friends. You may make a lot of people mad. But again, Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. And I think it can be taken as comfort in this way, that we sometimes we are an offense or we do disrupt, but there are a bunch of us, and we're all connected in communities like this, and that's what I love about it.
I think that, again, I'd have to agree with Mrs. Muth that there is just great hope because of the truly faithful Catholics and Christians that I'm seeing today, for one. So it's incredible that actually we're seeing it in Catholic schools, how there's kind of this revitalization of that, and they're drawing in people from other backgrounds because they want the good education. So you've got this Catholic and sort of, principled approach. But then I also love that this return to classical education, this return to, and it doesn't have to be classical, there are other methods, but fundamentally this turning back to the idea that we need to know how to think. We need to know how to be able to analyze what we're given for ourselves and not be a slave and have somebody else just tell us what we're supposed to think about it. And then, so then a lot of that does fall into the classical, and not just in the classical sort of method of teaching, but also this embracing of works that have stood the test of time as well. Whenever we start, so this is skipping a little bit, so it makes me think like my father-in-law, when he was alive, would say that the best preparation for philosophy and theology as an adult is to read a lot of history and good literature, because it gives you this vast experience of how the world works, basically. So you're seeing natural consequences, and good literature embraces the natural law. You see people who do evil things you see that they have the suitable consequences to that, or people who are selfish, are unhappy. And so when I tend to go back further with those books, I think that have stood the test of time, because sometimes when I get more contemporary literature, and especially I enjoy fantasy literature at times, but one of the real problems I see there is that there's not an understanding of the natural law. So you get somebody doing a vicious act and then turning around and doing something completely self-sacrificing and virtuous. It's like, yes, that can happen by God's grace, but that's not normally the way that things work. Normally there's these little things building up. So I love that we have this wealth of things to kind of build up our kingdom here. And those people are going to be able to think and adapt and adjust. Whereas what I'm seeing a lot in the world, and this happens in every society, if you go down this path of corruption and against the natural law and such, of course, it's not self-sustaining. So you can talk always about how God strikes down these countries, but basically they can't exist on their own because they've broken all of the rules and decided to embrace that and reject things. And plus by faith, we know we win. So it's all good. But no, I'm very encouraged as well by the movements that are happening today to restore things. I think we have struggles ahead of us, but we're preparing our troops well for going off into this world.
It's been neat to have a front row seat as my kids have gotten older. They're middle school, high schoolers now. We've got one more year with all four of them in school, and to see how a couple of years into the high school curriculum, how it's coming together. I can see it starting to gel, and to parents who are uncertain or hesitant, they're really nervous. I mean, that's me. Was me. I'm less so now. How are we gonna do this? Is it gonna work? It does work, and we have to trust the process. And Colby has developed this beautiful curriculum and approach, and this formation focused way of delivering what they have to offer. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to do it all from scratch. This process, we have to trust the process and do our part, and it's coming together. And of course, with God's grace, and of course, we transmit that this is for our children to take up themselves and continue. It's not something they receive passively, and that's that. It's something for them to receive from us and carry forward. But I'm happy to be able to see it taking root.
One of the things I've really enjoyed being on the podcast is because I feel it's one of the ways we can try to build up the Colby community. I mean, because we have, whenever I get around the other Colby employees, and we don't get to do it very often, but it's so exciting to meet such wonderful people who are just passionate about the mission of Colby. But I mean, through this and through our advisors and through our teachers, I want every Colby family to know that they're part of this great Catholic community. And so we have to keep working on it to make sure that everybody's got the support to when they're doubting, when they're thinking, I'm not sure I can do this, or it's like, no, they've got the support to help lift them up and reassure them and help them work through those problems. So, we're all scattered off, so it's not always easy, scattered around the world, basically. So it's not easy to kind of have that, to know that all the time. And so we'll keep working on it. But it's been nice to be part of the podcast because at least I feel that's one way that we can come together with a lot more people than are around my house here, at least.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yep. I think it's easy to think that it's all focused on the online school, but it's not. I mean, it's very clear through our conversations on the podcast and all the other efforts that Colby has engaged in to reach out to the homeschooling families as well. I mean, there's oftentimes such a blend. The families are using, they're mixing and matching. They may do mostly homeschool subjects or mostly online, or they may do all of one and the other. But there's also a lot of us who do a lot of both. So we found a lot of ways to kind of bring everybody in and get to hear from the folks who aren't as online based. They're more offline, which is great. It's great to be able to hear from them as well because they have so much to offer. So definitely want to keep them in the loop. Yeah.
yeah. I'm really excited about a lot of the things that are developing too, as far as what I've heard, Jordan, with your wife talking about some of the updates or changes they're making to like the Homeschool Plus sort of program, and just the different sort of ways that we can help support the more traditional homeschooling families. Because I mean, there are people who can just kind of, like you're saying, they don't need to delegate anything out. They can take everything and just do it themselves. But so often there's, whether it's like a homeroom program where you can maybe you don't have a lot of other Catholics your child's age in your area, and you can now go to this homeroom where once a week you get to chat with this nice Catholic community and get to know people over the years. And that's, I just think that's a great way to avoid that isolation or feeling you're all on it your own. So maybe you don't need a lot of the academics, but now you can support that way, or whatever way just happens to come up for the families. Just, I love how there is this constant demand within Colby that we be thinking of, what do our families need? What ways can we be better? How can we be even better than what we are? So I love that.
Yeah, I wish I would make another plug for that, for the motto I try to get them to adopt, with that contendit pro omnibus, which means it contends for all. That, because that's what it's been with Colby. I mean, there's all the different levels, all the different ways of doing Colby, different methods, and I mean that comes from the leadership and the vision they've had for a long time. So Mrs. Mary Rolls, who is the big boss at Colby, when COVID was happening, there was talk about, what do we do? All the classes are full. How can we handle this? And she was just like, we need to be available for people during this time. Like, let's just open it up. Like, we'll hire new teachers, we'll do whatever, and worked tirelessly to make that happen. So even in that moment, she recognized and just knew, there wasn't even a doubt in her mind that this is the right thing to do. We need to make this available to the people that need us right now. And no sense of, you didn't want us before, you want us now. It was the opposite. It was the opposite of that. And that's all reflected in the 3 ways to educate and the combinations between all of them. And so it really can fit your needs. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen. Everything has gotten better, and everything has improved with Colby as well, and we're all learning, and I'm grateful for the people that are there that are doing this with me. I think that's the big thing. Steven's right. Like, when we get a chance to get together, it's awesome. And this podcast is a little reflection of that. We get to talk with people we would have never been able to talk to before, international guests and things like that. So taking advantage of the opportunities that we have and using them for good.
I think it's such a fine example for the students and the families participating, that the way that the leadership has has traversed these challenging past few years and continues to look for ways to improve it. It's like an example to us all. Like, we're never finished in this life. We continue to grow, and that's reflected in how Colby's programs and people continue to grow and develop.
I guess I would mention real quickly too here is like, even though there's a place for being exclusive and stuff, that could have Colby did not need to grow. It didn't need to. It could have said, no, we're fine. We're at capacity. We'll take the best and the brightest students only. You have to like jump through all these hoops to try to get a chance to get into our school. And we could have done that several times, and that's not what it's done at all. It's just trying to expand it and give it to everybody.
That's been very apparent. And so coming in, being relatively new to Colby, I have a vision of what I'm passionate about. And I had a good idea of the vision and the mission of Colby coming in. But then you need to get in and kind of feel how the operation actually works. Do they do what they say that do they have that sort of integrity? And yeah, just a kind of a shout out to Mary, who doesn't put herself out there in front of everybody. She's not all about herself, but she is just always spot on mission, and so you can always go to her. And sometimes when you're doing different things, you just get in the weeds. You're not looking up at like, yes, we need to get there. You're thinking about, oh, this is going to create all this extra work and it's going to do this. But she's got her eye on the target though. So if you look, okay, yeah, that's right. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be heading over there. So that's always reassuring when you've got somebody that's just spot on all the time like that you've got this compass for the whole organization. So that's been fantastic over the last year, just getting to know Mary.
She's got that long view.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a fantastic 100 episodes. I'm so grateful to be embarking upon the next 100 with you both and everyone who helps us with the Kolbecast. My sister Hope continues to work with us behind the scenes. You don't hear her voice as much anymore, but she helps us with editing and show note writing and content development, all sorts of things. We have our social media team who helps us so much in so many ways, promoting episodes. Lauren and Bridget work on that with us and do such a great job with that. There are a number of people who work at Colby who offer a lot of really good guidance on content that we are developing. So I'm so appreciative for them as a sounding board of sorts. And of course, everybody we get to talk to week after week in the Colby organization.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolby.org.
A great deal. We always love hearing from listeners. You can write to us.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us.
Suggestions,
Ad Maiorum Dei Gloriam.
Things like that. We'd love to hear from you. You can support the Kolbecast by rating and reviewing us in your podcast app that you listen to us on. That helps, as I'm sure any podcast listener is used to hearing this sort of plug, that it helps the podcast gain visibility for other people who are on the lookout for a new podcast. So that's one way to help us there. And sharing our social media posts and other ways to spread the word if something that you've heard on a Kolbecast is helpful to you and might help someone else. All that to say, please keep in touch with us and write to us. And thank you for listening. Jordan and Stephen, thank you so much for visiting with me today and for continuing to collaborate with me on this. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's been a blast.
Yes. I've loved our time together, Bonnie. So I have to go back and look at when I get into the point where I've been on more podcasts than not been on podcasts. Yep. So I'm looking forward to that point and then continuing on here. So it should be fun.
Love it. It's been all blessing. It's been all gift. Thank you so much.